Welcome back to Guff Stuff Podcast. My name's Guff.
And I'm Javan.
So imagine this.
I'm imagining.
You're a young man.
Okay.
You're probably in your 20s or 30s. You're probably in your 30s. And you sit down and you're like, I'm going to change the world of gaming.
Okay.
And in 1993, you released a game called Magic the Gathering.
Oh, you're talking about Richard Garfield.
Yeah, Richard Garfield. And I think that we should start a series of podcasts on Magic the Gathering.
Okay. I'm in.
So I think
I've played Magic once or twice.
once or twice. And I think it's something that I like. I like Magic. I don't necessarily like the whole playing constantly. I don't have time to do all that. But I do love the game itself. I like the history of the game. The more I learn from you guys, and you specifically, and there's a few other people that are kind of lore whores. Is that a good word to use?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
The lore. I think it'd be fun just to talk about the history a little bit.
Yeah. I think I've heard the term lore junkie. I've heard the term lore masters, but I don't think I've ever heard lore whore.
Yeah, I think my son introduced that to me a few years ago.
It's a bit abrasive, but I get what it's getting at.
Yeah. We were talking about War Thunder at the time, and he's like, yeah, this and that, and I can't help it. I'm just a little bit of a lore whore.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that must be a Marine thing. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess.
So Richard Garfield, 1993, released this game called Magic the Gathering again. So here we are.
And it's kind of a small game now, right?
Yeah, it's not very big. Hasbro doesn't make its money off of that in D&D at all.
Yeah, so let's talk about how Magic was made. I've heard a story a long time ago.
Yep.
I don't know if it's true or not, but hey, I'm just going to repeat it anyways.
Hey, why not?
I don't remember if it was a documentary or what it was, but back in the early 90s, late 80s, there were these things called cons or conventions.
Yeah, absolutely.
A few of you, our listeners, may have heard of these things. Anyways, there's one in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Or is it Lake Genoa? I think it's Lake Geneva.
Yeah, I think it is too.
I could be wrong, because it's Gen Con.
Yeah.
And Gen Con was basically Gary Gygax, the creator of D&D, made this convention that people could come to, and they had what was called tournament play. And tournament play was you bring your D&D character that you think is big and mean and tough, and you play in these events that are run at conventions, and they're called tournaments. Well, people like this a lot, and there was some downtime between them, and a lot of these hardcore nerds from the closeted nerds of the late 80s, early 90s would show up to these events and play.
The closeted nerd.
And it was becoming more like socially acceptable to do these sorts of things.
Right.
Well, if you've ever been to a convention, you know that there's tons of downtime, and so they do like side events or just random like filler, so to speak, for your time. So Magic the Gathering was invented as a game to play in between your rounds at these D&D tournaments, more or less.
Because I get it.
And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but in my headcanon, I've always liked that.
No, it's definitely a good scenario for sure.
And I can't remember exactly where I heard. I think it was a documentary. I wish I could cite my source, but I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I've never actually looked into any of that as far as where and why. I looked into the game and all the creation of it, but not the actual reasons that it was created. Which I guess when we talk about Richard Garfield at some point in the future, that's probably going to come up.
We can delve
We'll
deeper
delve
into
deeper
that.
into that one for sure. So yeah, Wizards. What is Magic the Gathering to you? And then we'll go over like the official. If you're wrong, we'll go over the official. What is Magic the Gathering?
What? Okay, I see what you're saying. Magic the Gathering, from my own experience, is a card game with collectible elements. So it's a game where the cards are worth money. Like, it is collectible. And it's kind of like one of the first instances of you could collect something and then also play a game with it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's one of the most complex strategy games out there.
I think there's a really good argument to say that it is the most complex. I've seen some really good YouTube documentary like series on literally explaining why it's the most complicated game out there.
And it's also, I should mention, one of the simplest games.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a lot like, we've used this analogy for other games, but it's kind of like chess, where let me make an analogy to chess, and then we can go over what it actually is.
Yep.
Or do you want to go over what it actually is?
No,
first?
that's okay. No, this is fine.
Okay, so the analogy I have to chess, because people are familiar with that, is like you have checkers at the bottom. And checkers is you move it one direction and you could do one sort of action.
Right.
There's some extra rules, but it's
pretty self-explanatory.
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Diagonally and
where chess has multiple pieces that can move in multiple directions, and there are some extra rules, but at the end of the day, there's the core rule.
right.
Magic's the same way. Magic has its core rules. You play a land, you cast a spell, and these have morphed over time.
Oh yeah.
But basically, like there is a distinct or discrete set of rules for Magic the Gathering, and they hold true for everything, with the exception that the cards themselves can make exceptions to the rules.
Right.
And that's kind of where it begins to diverge from chess and checkers.
Right.
Like, imagine if checkers or chess, if you had, like your queens, for example, if you could put your own queen on the board, like your choice of queen,
Right.
that could move like a knight but not like a bishop.
Right.
That's where Magic begins to gain its complexity, is in the design choices of how you
Yep.
put your deck together. It's the idea that you can control what mechanisms you use.
Yep. Absolutely.
You get to choose your pieces to play with, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not restricted to a set group of what in chess. It's 16 pieces.
Pawns, knights, rooks, bishops, king, queen.
So
7 pieces.
well, I mean,
Well, 7
total.
distinct pieces.
Yeah, 7 distinct pieces. Yeah, 7 distinct pieces. So, where Magic has, I don't even know, honestly, probably thousands by now.
I remember when I stopped playing
Hundreds
Standard,
of unique mechanics in the game now.
they had hit 40,000 unique cards.
Yeah, it's something silly.
So what is Magic then? What is like the
Ma-
textbook definition?
It's a trading card game.
Okay.
At its most basic form, it's like what you said. You just said it a little more detailed. It's a game where you either won. I think when Richard, from what I read, pardon me, he wanted a game that helped him play because, well, first off, Richard was a mathematician. That's a big deal in this whole Magic world because everything's based on math and Magic, right? And being able to read, that helps too. But he wanted a game that he could take his love of sports cards and mix it together with his love of basically chess and math
And strategy games.
And he came up with this crazy idea that, well, I'll just combine it together. I still want my cards to be valuable like in sports cards, hoping maybe one day down the road he can have a card that's worth a lot of money, right? Mm. I don't think he probably envisioned it the way it has gone, because to foresee that, 30 years down the road or 20, it's 21, 1993 is when Magic was created, so
30 years.
31 years down the road.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild now. So yeah, in its base form, it's just a trading card game, collectible trading card game. I guess it would be or TCG.
Trading card game.
Yeah, but there's a collectible in there. TCG, collectible trading card game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's in base form. That's what it is. It's just literally a collectible trading card game, and it changed the world essentially in the world of gaming. I'd like to touch on something you said, that it gave something like gaming back in the 90s when this was created was still kind of a, like you said, not even, I don't know if you said taboo, but you said something along that lines where it was still kind of a fringe element thing.
Yeah, it wasn't socially acceptable
Right.
in most circles.
Right, and that's because the socially acceptable things were different during that time period.
Yep.
You know, we were after Vietnam and all this and that, and things just got weird.
Yeah, it's the Gen X was finding its identity, basically.
Yep. But it got me thinking about that for a little bit, and I think this might be one of the best things that's happened to. I'd like to say just this is going to sound weird, but it made me think about it, so I'm going to say it. Which, you know, that's how it goes. It got me thinking that it probably changed the way, at least a portion of the, I don't want to use the word outcast males, but males who are generally not sports dominated.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It gave those males the other males. Well, I mean, I like sports. I always have back then anyway.
Yeah.
I don't like the money aspect of sports today. But it gave us something to do during our downtime. That makes sense. Like,
Yeah,
when we're working, what do men generally do during their downtime? They either go do something they love to do, or they go cause trouble. I mean, that's just the two, really, because that's just how young males work.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say that Richard probably saved a lot of people in Magic the Gathering by creating a publicly accepted game.
He gave an outlet, a hobby outlet, basically, to a bunch of people. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Gary Gygax, kind of started.
Oh yeah.
Well, I guess it goes deeper than that, but we're not talking about.
No. I was just the TCG came. This
trading card
multiplied
game,
it.
Yep.
And everything builds off Magic now.
Yeah, you can kind of
literally almost every TCG builds off Magic somehow.
Yep, and you can look back and see. See that
you can tie it up. When we go through Richard's history, like I was explaining earlier to you before we started this podcast. Holy crap! But anyway, so we're gonna move on. We're gonna have a whole podcast about Richard and his craziness because he deserves at least a podcast from two dudes in the middle of nowhere, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so moving on past that, what is the first thing that comes out in Magic? The set it's called an Alpha set. It has 295 cards, of mixture of lands, sorcery. Did they call them sorceries back then?
So they were called sorceries, but instants were called interrupts.
That's right, interrupts, lands, interrupts. I don't know. I don't know much about the first few.
There was
sets.
also mana sources.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, mana.
So
sources.
it wasn't.
They named things a little differently back then.
Yep.
So though I don't remember the terminology very. I don't have a lot of those cards because they're expensive. So.
Yeah.
Not too long came the beta set and then the unlimited set, which is where I guess my card collecting kind of starts. Because I've bought cards that were from the unlimited set before. Never really bought cards from the other sets, them two older sets. So those three sets came out. Magic took off, and now we have a game. Was there any? What was I going to say? I'm trying to think of the specifics here. My brain just shut off, man.
That's okay. So one of the cool things about the Alpha, Beta Unlimited Revised is that the game sold so quickly that the printings are actually kind of strange. They had to change like fonts and different things. Like the shift of what they decided, it was because they Alpha was like a prototype.
Right.
Alpha cards were like, hey, we have this idea for a game.
Let's try it.
Let's try it. So they printed a bunch of cards. They sold like hotcakes, and they're like, oh, well, we realized that when we printed this was kind of like weird or awkward or something like that. And so from Alpha to Beta even, they changed like some of the things would be like, in these first four sets would be like the tap symbol might change.
Right.
Or the wording on cards specifically might change. Or the font. Or I don't think mana symbols changed quite yet. but there was mana symbols got changed a few
Yep.
times.
Yeah, they actually have. Yeah.
And the other thing that was really interesting was like in the alpha set, it was a prototype set.
Right.
The fact that we think of alpha as like the first set,
Right.
when really it's like it's Magic point
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, it's like
It's the early access Magic,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And it had its own bugs too, considering that Volcanic Islands, one of the most like powerful lands, because it's blue-red, it's just a very strong combination of colors.
Right.
Wasn't even printed in the first set.
Right. That's amazing.
It wasn't printed until beta set. And so you had 9 of the dual lands. It wasn't even a full cycle in the first set.
Right.
And these first printings were kind of plagued with these sorts of things. And it's also what makes them so expensive and so rare.
Right.
Is that there was so few of them. And then, the reserve list came along. But we could talk about that in a second.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah. So yeah, there we are. We're moving on. What would be the most iconic card that come from that first block? I say block loosely because Magic's kind of changed how that works, but
So iconic cards would be basically any of the Power 9.
Yep.
There's a great argument for that. Black Lotus is kind of the
poster boy.
poster boy. I would actually make the argument that like for all formats, because
Yep.
like a lot of those Power 9 and those extremely powerful cards aren't playable in most formats.
Yep.
And I'm kind of in the camp of Lightning Bolt or Dark Ritual or
Yeah.
some of these cards that don't look so strong compared to a Black Lotus or a Time Walk.
Right.
But when you look at them and how much they were played in like specific formats, like Lightning Bolt is still played in most formats that it's legal in.
Oh yeah, well,
because it's still
solid,
good.
It's still a solid card. It's just
It's one of the best removal spells, and it can also aim at your face.
right.
Like it, and that is just they got it right on the first try with Lightning Bolt.
Right.
Kind of.
So okay, you mentioned that since we're doing a little history of Magic, why are the Power 9 not accessible to the average thing? Like, why is Black Lotus not in every deck?
So, if you want to learn more about the Power 9, we have another podcast that we cover all of them, like in detail.
Yeah. Now, well, I'm just.
But you're talking
just
about
for a brief.
okay.
The Power 9. Why are they not acceptable in this thing in a short?
The reason why the Power 9 aren't really allowed is because you talked about math being involved.
Oh yeah.
In Magic the Gathering. And one of the easiest ways to break Magic the Gathering is Magic the Gathering has what I like to call systems.
Right.
And groups and functions and ideas that work within their group. So it's the idea of taking a system in mathematics and then applying a different function to that system. It begins to change how it's calculated, so to speak. So, and that effect ends up happening where, like, Black Lotus is 0 mana, so there's no cost, and it just gives you 3 free mana of one color.
Right.
The cost is sacrificing the artifact, but the artifact didn't cost you anything to begin with.
Right.
Time Walk is paid 2 mana to take a whole entire extra turn. Oof. Early game, not that great. Late game,
that's pretty significant.
An extra turn now costs, probably 6 to 8 mana.
Right.
And then the card will exile itself.
Right.
So a lot of these Power 9 cards didn't have the protections in place to keep them from being abused by players. There was no systems of checks and balance within the rest of the systems of Magic.
Right.
So these cards in a vacuum, when you look at them, it's like, yeah, that's powerful. But when you start combining them with things that came afterwards, or you basically have to design around these cards now. And then everybody wants 4 copies of them. And it just kind of takes the game and applies an outward pressure to the systems that make it kind of fall apart at the seams.
Yeah.
if everybody's going to run 4 Black Lotuses, well, now every deck has to be designed around 4 Black Lotuses. And with that in mind, every mechanic going forward.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that's the idea behind restricting or banning these cards and formats.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So, yeah, they are, and they're some of the most valuable cards in the whole system, as it turns out too. So if the listener comes across some of those cards, be wary of fakes, mind you. There's millions of them out there. But if you do and it's verified real, you might want to get that graded. And,
yeah.
Pay for the grading, pay for the sell of it, and you'll be happy. Every game store will want one if they can afford it.
True.
Okay, we're moving past the beginning of Magic. We're going to move on to the expansion and growth era, which is, past the introductory phase, which is was the alpha, beta, unlimited, were basically an introduction to the game. The expansion and growth era was about from 1995 to about 2000, it's considered. And it came out with sets such as like Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, The Dark, yep. It also during all these sets introduced new themes, new mechanics, of course, a slew of new cards. As we know, every new set comes out with a brand new style of card, and usually a new mechanic. But something bigger happened in the 90s than even adding new sets. And that would be in 96, something that you talked about a lot, or still talk about off and on, is the Pro Tour. What do you got to say about the Pro Tour? Why is that so significant?
I mean, why is the NBA so significant?
Yeah.
Why is MLB... Why are pro sports so big money generators?
Yep.
Think about how many kids play baseball or play football or play the other football, soccer.
Yeah.
And look to like Cristiano, Ronaldo, and like look at Tom Brady and look at Mark McGuire. Basically any big name you can think of, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
It's this idea that if you're very good at something, you can A, make a living at it, B, gain fame or notoriety for it.
Yep.
And there's this idea that like something you care and are passionate about, other people care and are passionate about, and the Pro Tour puts a face on it, more or less.
Right.
It's just simply a way for people to connect with something they care about at a deeper level. Right. I feel like.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you said the Pro Tour was even televised for a long time.
So yeah, we were talking before, and it was on ESPN.
Nice.
It was literally on ESPN in the early days.
That's cool. I've watched Pro Tour, but usually just on like YouTube or a streaming service or something. One of those services. But also, the Pro Tour was a big deal in the 90s for sure. And I think that took Magic even one step higher.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
But it also created something that I don't think that they foreseen either. And that was called the reserve list. That came out after the first Pro Tour.
Yeah.
The reserve list is a list of cards that will never be reprinted. So saith Wizards of the Coast. Now, they have held to that to this point, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
How many cards are on the reserve list, do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I couldn't tell you.
I didn't look that up, so I thought maybe you might just have that knowledge floating around in your brain.
Not that one. Not that specific one.
We tried anyway. So we're going to moving on past the expansion and growth era. Safe to say at this point, Magic is doing pretty well for itself.
Yeah, there was a couple. So I do want to touch on during the expansion and growth. There were some pretty rough sets.
Yeah, Homelands.
Homelands was a big one. And there were growing pains mixed with speed bumps for sure. Yeah. For sure. But I think the Pro Tour kind of helped guide it along, kind of helped give it something grounded, something tangible to like people could still be like, well, at least it's the Pro Tour.
I like to think that just from when I was doing the research, the Pro Tour spawned a lot of this other stuff. Like you said, it was a good time to sort out a lot of the looming issues that Magic had really quick, because the minute you publicize somebody and you say there's money involved, anybody who doesn't want to work for the man will find a way to make money in this sport.
Yep.
Which means cheating will happen.
And there was
And
rampant
game mechanics
cheating.
will be abused completely.
Yeah, if you ever want to see if your game, if you ever want to see your game get broken or the system stress tested,
Right.
have a prize pool tournament, because you will find out what's cheesable and what's not.
Yeah.
People will find a way to exploit the game.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
and honestly, if you think about it, having the Pro Tour helps them play test at a high level.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
And-
no, I think it changed a lot.
You get some oopsies here and there, but at the end of the day, it's better for the health of the game to have a window or a viewport to look at it at the highest level.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it was a good. I think it was a good time for him. It was the growth time, and of course, you have growing pains. But then you move on to the golden era,
Let's talk about it.
and that's from 2000 to 2010.
So, what was the first set that came out in 2000? What's the first set of the golden era? Is there a set that marks it?
It's the invasion block.
Yes.
The
Yep.
invasion block.
My
which I
favorite
think
lands
was,
to this day. Invasion and Odyssey are my favorite lands.
That was like Mirrodin.
So Invasion
Or no,
was
Invasion
the
was-
no Invasion was technically the Phyrexian invasion
Fraction.
of
Yep.
Dominaria at the
Right.
time.
Which is considered to be like the home.
It's
play
like
to
the home
Magic.
play, and
Yeah.
we've come back to it now in recent
Yep.
years too, which is nice. But yeah, so Mirrodin comes later.
Yeah. Okay.
But Mirrodin kind of called back to the Phyrexians. It was like the callback. And Magic's very good at doing that. Magic has had a storyline basically since Invasion Block
Right.
or Ice Age, which they've called back to in Cold Snap. They have these sets and these ideas and these planes that you can call back to. And so the lore masters and the lore junkies can really, have that. They can always fall back on it.
It's when my daughter got into playing Magic, she started getting into the lore pretty hard, and so she was scouring the internet for pretty much any tidbit of information to find on her favorite planeswalker, which leads to, of course, once you go down the rabbit hole, there's a big rabbit hole. There's a lot of game theory out there, but there's also a lot of lore that they put out, whether it was if you read the. So one of the things I really love about Magic, and I'm kind of going off it's not really, well, it is history.
It's part of the golden age. Like, this is when this stuff started
is-
really coming to the forefront.
The little the little word, the little
Flavor text?
Flavor text, yes,
Yeah.
that's the words of text. Okay, yeah, flavor text.
The enemy's coming. Quick, inflate the toad.
But if you go through and you look at the whole set and you read all the flavor text, there's a little bit of a lore involved in all of it.
Oh, for sure. They have quotes from people,
Yeah, it's
interacting
crazy.
with other people.
And unless you're reading that, and then at the time they had these things called fat packs, where they started coming out in, I don't know exactly when. I know at least I have one from Mirrodin, so at least then, probably farther back. But I know in them books they had little snippets of lore.
Yep.
And then I imagine in the Dungeon magazines and the Dragon magazines, they probably had little articles on.
I don't know on that one, to tell you the
I mean,
truth.
well, maybe not those specific magazines, but the trade magazines from those the gaming style
Game and
magazines
Trade magazine. yeah.
probably had snippets of lore. And in fact, I know they do because when I was watching stuff, when we were watching stuff on Liliana the Veil, or Liliana Vess, I should
Yep.
say, sorry. They had, one of the articles, the only time they talk about a certain part of her life was from one of these articles. That one of the game designers just wrote up an article on her and
Cool.
threw it in there, and it's like, holy smokes. So, yeah, all the flavor text is really cool. And I don't know when they started adding all that flavor text, but it was definitely a pretty cool time. I'd like to say it was probably the golden age when they featured storyline, the big storyline.
It's when they started becoming more cohesive because they're out of the growing pain,
right.
right?
Now they're just kind of like, okay, we're going to get our stride now. Now we can just start
Yep.
making it more fun. And
Now we
more-
can we got the systems nailed down.
Right.
We can start
Yep.
figuring things out.
Yeah, when they did that, then in 2002, of course, they launched Magic the Gathering Online,
Moto. Yep. Magic Online digital objects.
which basically allowed you to pay to play online, essentially, too.
Yep.
But it was, of course, you're online. You could do it from the comfort of your home, your hotel room, if you're traveling wherever. But I mean, everything there still has value. They kept it true to the value of the card, because I know that you could go on and buy your lightning bolt online through that game.
Yep.
Which changes later, mind you. I mean, them services still going.
Yep.
But they make it more free to play later on in life. But I mean, and you could resell that lightning bolt to somebody else.
Yeah, so there was a secondary market, and
Right.
still is a secondary market on MTGO.
Yeah,
And a fairly thriving one, I would venture to say.
yeah, it's an interesting concept to think that. I don't know. I like it. I mean, it kind of broke my head the first time, because I think you're the first one to tell me about it back in years ago. You're like, yeah, I know, I play MTGO, and then another guy, Bigfoot, I think you call him.
Yep.
He told me about it and how he plays Pauper on there all the time.
Yep.
And he'd come in here to the store and tell me, oh, your Pauper cards you got to go through all these sets, because all these Pauper cards on MTGO are going way up. That means it's going to hit the paper market, and you need to get on it now before someone comes in and buys all these up.
And that's the other thing, too, is like MTGO and online Magic, this is still pretty early.
Yeah, no, this is 2002. So 22 years ago.
Like you said, it introduced accessibility to people who might not necessarily have a local game store or
Which would be almost everybody in
community.
these towns.
Yeah.
Up until I opened a store. I mean, which was 12 years ago, but 11 years ago. But I mean, yeah, there was nowhere to game really. So anyway. So in honor of not talking about subject 2, we'll go back to some of these subjects and cover them in more detail. We're just trying to get a timeline of Magic here for you. So for Magic went and played for quite a while before anything major happened again. It just kind of, like almost 10 years, it just kind of did its thing and trudged along. And
I mean, there's definitely sets and things that happened
Yeah,
in
yeah,
there
yeah.
that changed it. So what's your next era?
no, we're not done with
Sorry.
that era yet. We still have to hit the end of this era, which would be technically you're moving on to the new era,
Yep.
2011, when the modern format was created.
Yeah, so should we talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so modern, there was a pro tour to support it.
Yep.
And it was like the Wild West, because things were ridiculously juiced,
Yep.
so to speak, because you had, and it was this new exciting format. So back then you had basically standard and not standard.
Right.
I think it was type 1 and type 2.
Yeah. It was all called types. It was weird.
You also had EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, which wasn't even a fully supported format. And then you had limited,
Right.
which included sealed or draft. But yeah, so this is when the formatting sort of really kind of came into its own.
Right.
You also had block constructed, which was like only stuff from its block.
Right.
So like example would be like Ravnica, Dissension, anything in that Ravnica City of Guilds, Ascension,
Yep.
stuff like that. They could play within their block. So Ravnica block, that was it. You could
Yep.
play those, the original. Modern comes out, and this is where they start to actually think about formats and think about different ways to play the game and making them cohesive.
Yep.
Having standardized templates, so to speak, or pools of cards. That's
Right.
what they are.
Yeah.
At the end of the
essentially
day,
it's a pool of cards.
a
Yep.
format is just what cards are allowed.
Yep.
And when modern came out, it said everything from 8th edition onwards. They looked back and they're like, okay, 8th edition, yeah, we'll put the cutoff here. There was a border change.
Right.
So they put the cutoff at 8th edition and said everything from 8th edition onwards you can play in modern.
Right.
And so this let people play their type 1 decks, their standard decks that they loved from back in the day, and kind of convert them and see how they'd hold up against some other standard decks or some other block constructed decks
Right.
of the time without having to go all the way back to the beginning of Magic.
Yeah. That was a nice little introduction, I think, or a nice little mix. You could play Ravnica's block against the Theros block, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
Or you could take cards from all those blocks and just play them against each other.
Yeah, and
It was kinda
there were
cool.
definitely growing pains with that. Like there were things that were banned
Oh, yeah.
at the onset of modern that were a problem in their block constructing. Like Golgari Grave Troll is a great example.
Yep.
A lot of the dredge stuff. Some of the storm stuff was banned, I believe, or it got banned really early on.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, it was basically like kind of the Wild West. And the Pro Tour is so fun to watch because there's so many wild, crazy decks because the meta hadn't been developed.
Right.
And so when people showed up, they kind of just brought whatever. And some of the most interesting ideas I've ever seen in Magic come out of that Pro Tour.
Right.
Because you have people playing like decks that they played in Standard but juiced up. And then you also have people like forming whole new archetypes.
Right.
Just
Yeah, because you
blue.
could take something from Ravnica, say graveyard, grabbing, and you could take something from Theros and mix that together, and you could take
Yep.
something from another set, Avacyn Restored or whatever, and just come up with, like you said, a whole new archetype. Like,
yeah.
I
And
didn't
a
know you
lot of
could
it
do
was
that.
like the Zendikar fetch lands were a big deal because you had
fetch
had
lands, yep.
enemy fetches basically.
Yeah.
And you didn't actually have the old fetch lands. You didn't have the onslaught fetch
Right.
lands.
Oh, I
Or
didn't know.
Onslaught or Scourge. I can't remember off the top of my
I
head.
don't know, actually.
But those didn't come back until Khans block, but we're not there
Right,
yet.
yep, we're getting there, for sure.
But yeah, so the inception of Modern really kind of opened the door, and how successful it was
Yep.
for Wizards to be like, okay, let's make new formats. And now there's so many formats.
Oh,
it's painful.
I don't think we're going to go over them all today, but
There's
there's a lot.
The idea
a
of
lot of them.
there was a distinct point at which, and this is kind of when the rules cleaned up too. I mean, the rules had cleaned up before,
Yep.
but we talked about things being like interrupts or instants or mana sources.
Yep.
Like Dark Ritual now is an instant
Right.
spell. It adds 3 mana to your mana pool. It used to be a mana source,
Right.
which could be played before something else. It
Right.
had a different speed. And mana sources were their own speed, and they didn't interact with the stack. So technically, Dark Ritual was like more or less uninteractable with. And then you had stacking damage
Right.
and all these other things.
That's actually a really good snippet of info there that interrupts and instances aren't necessarily the same,
They are not, no.
because an instant just goes onto a stack where an interrupt does not.
No, so the way that interrupts,
other way around.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
So the way interrupts and mana sources worked was like you're saying you're doing something. I go, no, I interrupt.
Right.
And unless you had an interrupt or a mana source, you couldn't do anything about it.
Okay. Right.
Where now we have speeds of things.
Yep.
There's land speed, as I like to call it, and
Yep.
then they also kind of figured out around this golden era
Yep.
of Magic, priority.
Oh yeah.
Was like how that actually worked. They went into the nitty gritty after the growing pains, and they kind of said, "All right, this is how the game functions. There's a damage step. There is, it all happens at once.
Right.
That way, you don't have players arguing like, well, no, my creature hits yours first because it's my turn, and
Right.
It basically centralized all of the logic, so to speak, of the systems of Magic.
Yep.
It's a very fancy way of saying it.
Yeah, no, and I think that I know when I'm teaching new players or having new players ask questions, hey, when I cast this, does this go before this? I said, well, you got to just remember, you're pretty much, it's kind of like playing War. You lay down a card, the next card goes on top of it. If it doesn't beat or stop that card completely, and take it out of the game immediately, and you just keep stacking.
Yeah,
And it's a stack. And then the top card goes first. Whatever happens after that, we might take 3 cards out, and then the next card after that goes, and it just keeps going down until you get to the first card played.
Yep, you build from the
reverse
bottom
order.
up, and I can't think of another game before Magic that
Yeah.
did something like that.
No, I
Where everybody puts their stuff on the table in a specific order,
Yep.
and then you go backwards to resolve it.
yeah, no, it's really crazy.
It's a very elegant solution to a very unique problem that Magic the Gathering had.
Yep. Yeah, I actually have a playmat. It's my favorite playmat by far. It actually breaks down the stack and priorities and how all this works.
And-
in one an easy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 step. Like it literally just tells you.
And this is also where I mean, technically everything was always a spell.
Yep.
So like Magic the Gathering, if we think of it like D&D terms,
Yep.
or think of it in like a role-playing game terms,
Yep.
you are playing a planeswalker, a wizard, so to speak, a
Yep.
sorcerer, a magical being. And whenever you play a creature, it's not like the creature's just there.
Right.
It's you are opening a portal and that creature's walking out and you control that creature
Yep.
via mind powers. It's honestly, creature spells are all kind of just familiars. And
Right. Yeah.
in Magic.
Advanced familiars. Yeah.
That's essentially, or you're using like creature summoning spells.
Right.
But they are spells. And that's why counterspell, like, well, it's a creature. It's not a spell. No, it's a spell. And sometimes people have trouble discerning that. And that was the nice thing about this era of Magic, is that you have definitive answers to these questions.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that come from that, and it's cool. Okay. So we're in modern format. That came out. Also, that same year, EDH became fairly
Commander.
popular. Yeah, Commander. Commander came very popular, and it's probably one of the most popular ways to play now overall.
I
mean,
think it might be the most popular way to
Yeah,
play.
it's absolutely, people seem to love. I mean, I understand why.
Yeah, you
It's
need
not my
one copy of
favorite
a
way to play,
card.
but-
It's casual, quote unquote.
Yeah, and the restrictions are very. I mean, there's still a ban list, mind you.
Yeah.
It's just not as hardcore as some of the other ban
Yeah,
lists
I
are.
mean, I always like to think of Commander as 4-player Legacy.
Yeah.
But with one card.
Yeah.
One
and
copy of any card.
Right, and you always get to use your cards that you had to put off the table when
Yeah.
you rotate out of standard. You're
Yep.
like, or when you rotate out of modern, you're like, oh, but I still want to play with at least that card.
Yep.
Okay, well you can just do it in Commander now. So
Yep.
that became really super popular, and today is, I mean, everybody knows what Commander is. Every set comes out with a new Commander set now.
Oh, yeah.
Like Wizards has doubled down on Commander.
Yeah.
I think they're Wizards, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd like to think you guys are trying to switch that and call it Brawl. I
No,
mean,
so Brawl was supposed
such
to
a
be
weird.
Brawl is specifically it was supposed to be a 60-card commander
Right.
for standard.
Yep.
But now they're saying it's 100 cards.
Yep.
Because 60 singleton is a little weird. Like,
Oh,
I
it's
kind of get why they're
absolutely weird.
doing it.
It's absolutely weird.
But Brawl is still supposed to be standard.
Okay.
Where you get into the weird stuff is saying standard and then MTG Arena, which we'll get to later.
Yeah. Which well, that's the next thing on the list. That the next major change was MTG Arena. That came out, believe it or not, 2018. So it was still a while ago. It's been on for quite a while.
So
That's 6 years.
I think another thing that we should talk about between 2010 and 2018
Yep.
is Wizards' kind of self-reflection.
Okay.
So there was a period in there where Wizards changed how standards work, changed how they kind of overhauled the entire Magic again.
Oh, right.
So like they had the growing pains, right?
Yep.
And the growing pain, well, let's go way back, right? Alpha Beta is the Wild West.
Yep.
You have no idea what's going on. Growing pains is like, okay, this game's picking up traction. We're beginning to formalize some of these systems.
Yep.
Golden Age is like, okay, we have a standard template for how to play Magic.
Yep.
2010 to 2018, I like to think of as like the fine-tuning era.
Right.
And we're still kind of in this era,
Right.
but there was an era of self-reflection where Wizards is like, okay, is Golgari Grave Troll really need to be banned in Modern?
Right.
And then they take a hard look at it and they go, no, some of the fears we had in the past are unwarranted now.
Well, there's enough cards now added to the pool that.
And that's when they also started coming up with the idea of printing cards for formats specifically.
Yeah.
Not
Modern
just
Horizons,
standards. Exactly. Or Commander
Eternal-
Legends, stuff
Commander
like that.
Legends, Eternal Masters, yeah.
And so there's this idea that like they're comfortable with where the game lies at its core. So now let's retroactively fix some of the problems
Right.
with the older things. And so I like to think of this era as a self-reflection era.
Right.
They
That's-
can
that's a good way to
they
look
can
at it.
look at it and go, okay, yeah, this definitely needed to be something different,
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it for sure.
But now, 2018,
Yeah. And now you've. I don't know. I love and hate Arena at the same time.
So
Like I played a lot of the Magic Duels. If you remember that.
Duels of the Planeswalkers.
Yeah, Duels
yep.
of the Planeswalkers. Actually, that's how I learned how to play Magic.
I think that's a lot of people
On the
around that
PlayStation.
mid 15.
I had that, downloaded
yeah.
it. Or was it the PlayStation? Yeah, it was PlayStation.
It was on PlayStation, Xbox.
Yeah, it was one of. I think it was a
Steam.
PlayStation. I got them on Steam also. Blah blah blah. But I just played it for hours and hours and hours and been enthralled with the whole game. Well, I mean, I started playing Magic in 2012 when I had it in the thrift store, but I didn't really get into it until I got the games.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I need to know more, and there was only a limited amount of people I knew, you and Emerson at the time, but I don't even know if Emerson knew anything about Magic at that time. I knew you did because you talked about it.
I mean, he knew through the transfer property of I played it, right?
But I mean, so I'm like, but I didn't know you very well, so it was like, do I harass this one guy that comes into my store about a game, or should I just figure it out?
Yeah.
Well, it ends up being what you're going to find out in Magic if you don't know already. Even if you're living in a little town, and we still find this out, we get people coming in here probably weekly going, there's people that play Magic around here.
Yeah, it's still
People don't understand like how big this game is.
Yeah.
It is so huge.
it
Even if you
permeates almost.
It's safe to say we live in one of the most least populated parts of the world. In the
Yep.
country, I mean. Sorry, not the world. I mean, other than like remote Alaska or Montana or something.
Yeah.
I mean, most of our towns are less than 5,000 people
Yeah.
for miles in every direction.
Yeah.
And yet we still have Magic players. And it just dumbfounds me.
So, an Arena, you know why Arena came about? It's
No.
because this is my theory. I guess it's never been stated, but it's a pretty likely story in my
Right.
mind. So, MTG Online was kind of this relic of code and spaghetti that was like thrown together at a time.
hold it together with duct tape and spit.
And they didn't really understand online gaming that well at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was the first company to really do that,
And
too.
Duels of the Planeswalkers was from a time of before live service games.
Right.
Of the idea of like you make a game and you just leave it
Yep.
and you're done.
Yep. No, that's exactly what it was. Yep.
And then 2018 is an era of, could you think of what card game came out in an online format that was huge, if not as big as Magic?
Is that Pokemon? No.
Hearthstone.
Oh, Hearthstone. Yeah. Of course.
So Hearthstone comes out, has its own Pro
Warcraft,
Tour,
yeah.
all this and that. And it's strictly digital.
Yeah, that's true.
And so Magic sees this and they go, oh, our game is better than that game.
We're gonna,
Like they know it. Like,
Right.
like-
Well, yeah,
and-
no doubt.
I'm not here to argue Magic's better than Hearthstone,
Right.
but Wizards has that mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they say our game is better than that game. But this client, our architecture for doing that game is not good.
Right.
At least for the casual average video gamer.
Yep.
And so what they did was they came up with Magic the Gathering Arena, which now people who play video games, it looks like a video game. It feels like a video game.
It does.
It feels like Hearthstone.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like Magic.
Right. No, it doesn't feel like MTGO. at
But
all.
the people that play Magic a lot can also look at it and go, oh, yeah, that's Magic.
Yeah.
It gives accessibility, but also depth.
Yep.
To a certain
and
extent.
you can play it on your phone. You can play it pretty much any
Yeah.
system there is out there right
Yeah.
now.
And they paid the money to just have good architecture this time around.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And they can also very carefully control the flow of cards that go in to keep it from being oppressive or broken.
Yeah.
Whereas with MTGO, because like if you're a new player and you play on Arena and something is ridiculously overpowered, well, you don't have to worry about it because that was just never allowed in to begin with.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's very popular. I think
For good reason.
you know it came out, and then not too long afterwards we had the internet the scare.
Oh, the big C word.
The big C word, and like a lot of Magic players who were like, "No, I'm not going to play Arena." They're like, "Well, I want to play Magic
So they turned to
to,
Arena
to get
or
your fix
MTGO.
because you
but-
couldn't go to your local Magic store."
Yeah.
All right, I'll do online because that's what's available to me. And now everybody plays that, and a lot of people still play in store too. But
Well, and I what I found is that most people that converted to Arena, and this is true for our local stuff, and even some of the bigger game stores nearby,
Right.
is that the standard Friday Night Magic isn't really played anymore because people will just go play that on Arena.
Yeah.
So what you end up getting is the brick and mortar stores end up running more Commander or more Limited or
Right.
drafts or
have to do more event style stuff instead of just
or
standard events.
lean on some of those other formats.
Yeah, like Pioneer
And Modern and
all the other
Legacy,
ones that are out there. Yeah.
which, one of the game stores close by us still does Modern and Legacy events.
Right. That's crazy. We never even got into Legacy, but that, what?
But that was all part of formatting.
Yeah, that's
right?
all part of the format. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other things that have changed now, since we're past that, the last, I say 4-5 years, I'm not exactly sure, but they've started doing crossover sets, which, like it or not, I don't particularly like the crossover sets myself. There's a lot of collectors that love it because they get to see their favorite. And what I mean by crossover, I suppose I should explain that, is
IP crossover.
IP crossovers. They'll take Dungeons and Dragons. There was Street Fighter, Walking
Fallout,
Dead, Lord of the Rings, Fallout,
Warhammer.
Yeah, 40K.
Yeah.
And they took them and made cards for Magic in their own format-ish format. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't particularly like that. I don't think they needed to do that. I think they were doing fine without that. I understand why they did it, though. To bring in new people. These are all the real Lord of the Rings in here, and all the Lord of the Ring nerds, which, I happen to be, but are like, well, what's this game that now my Legolas is in, or Gimli, and I can go and look in the One Ring that, how much did that sell for?
Post Malone bought for $2 million.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's the money of Magic, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm torn. I like it. I don't like it. It is what it is, though. I'm okay with it because it's obviously helping the world of Magic. So,
yeah, and then there's also there are criticisms to be had of how Magic has gone in the past 5 years, for sure.
Right.
And they've definitely leaned into the monetization, but we've seen this everywhere.
Yeah.
You can buy skins for your Magic cards now.
Yeah.
With these different prints and all this and that, and they're kind of capitalizing on that fear of missing out.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you can still just play the game for what it is.
Yeah, no, I literally, I don't pay for anything on Arena.
But it's not even just Arena, but in real life, some of the cards that are printed are premium cards or whatever.
Oh, yeah, they have the showcase cards and the full art showcases.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, if you really like for Commander, if I really like a Commander, I'll buy a full art of the Commander. Heck yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, of course.
But doing it, that's what made it special is also what's kind of hurting it.
Yeah.
Actually, I phrased that wrong. What made it special was the limited number of these things, right?
Yes.
Not the exclusiveness of being able to buy them right now and only now,
but
that there were so few of them.
Right.
To begin with.
Right. I feel Wizards is going through what sports cards went through in the late 80s, mid-90s to the late 90s. Is the late 80s, they were like, we need to up our game so people start collecting these for more than just kids.
Yeah.
And they did. They started throwing in chase cards. They throw in special promo cards, signature cards.
Gold-plated cards.
Gold-plated cards, right. I got into all that. I have lots of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Well, not lots of it anymore, but I have had lots of that over the years. And I see Wizards and even Pokemon starting to delve into it a little bit, and I'm guessing all the companies are doing it because they need to keep up. One company needs to keep up with the
And
other.
it's effective.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, fiduciary responsibility says you have to.
Ooh, yeah.
That's all. We've been over that I don't know how many times.
Yep.
Anyways, anything else for Magic?
No, that we're kind of coming to the end. It's just it's a game that's influenced people for over 30 years, and right or wrong, they've done their best to do it. And I think the company Wizards of the Coast has done a absolutely great job of catering to its people, to the players. And I mean, we've had good employees and bad employees throughout those times. We've had good sets and terrible sets.
Yep.
I would like to end this with your one favorite thing and maybe one thing you'd love to see them change, and I will also say the same thing.
My favorite thing?
Yeah, your favorite thing that over the years that Magic has done that you've enjoyed the most.
the company itself. You know what?
Yeah.
Scratch it. I'm gonna share my favorite Magic moment.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, favorite
So-
Magic. That's fine. Yeah, what your favorite thing?
Yeah.
about
So
it?
my favorite thing in all of Magic is there's a Pro Tour game,
Yep.
and Johnny Magic's behind the driver's seat. And at the Pro Tour, we talked about this. Those pros, when you make the Pro Tour and you play like a modern Pro Tour, you submit a deck list, and your opponent gets your deck list, you get their deck list. You can see all the cards in their deck when you sit down to play them.
Right.
Johnny Magic mana leaks this guy's spell, and this is an important spell. Like, this is like a game-winning thing, right?
Right.
And Johnny Magic, John Finkel, for those who don't know, basically my favorite player of all time.
Right.
Kind of the Michael Jordan Magic, I like to think. Anyways, he casts a spell called Mana Leak. And in Mana Leak is you counter a spell unless they pay 3 mana. Okay, so it makes the spell cost 3 more, right?
Right.
His opponent has 2 untapped lands and a fetch land. A fetch land is a land you can pay a life, sacrifice, search your library, and put a land on the battlefield.
Right.
It's for mana fixing. And you don't normally crack it because if you don't need the mana, you don't crack it.
Right.
Johnny Magic just throws a Mana Leak. He has a hard counter spell in hand. That can just counter it outright.
Right.
But he casts the spell that's like, I'll counter this unless you pay the mana. And his opponent's like, okay, well, yeah, I'll win the game, so I'll crack this fetch land. Begins to search through his library. He has no valid targets for his fetch land. He pulled all of the things that it could fetch out of the library already.
Ooh.
John Finkel's looking at the deck list. So he knows he doesn't have fetchable lands.
Right.
And it's this idea that if you ever give John Finkel the perfect information or like what's in your deck,
Right.
you're screwed.
Right.
You're just not gonna win because he's just better than you.
Right. He just knows it more than you
He
do.
just knows better.
Right.
He knows your deck better than you know your deck.
Right.
Just by looking at it once. And that's my favorite, all-time favorite moment in Magic. Like
Nice.
it is. There's so many moments like that with John Finkel in Magic. Just watch John Finkel greatest moments in Magic. Like it's.
And he just does stuff that you're
Like,
like,
I get like
Right.
excited and jittery when I talk about it. It's just I get giddy. It's just
Right.
it's so fun to watch.
Well, that's good. That just proves right there that when and you know you're not the only person. Obviously, if someone made it greatest moments, there's probably thousands of people, or if not hundreds of thousands, that love that. And I guess my favorite thing about Magic is overall is that it just changes so much every time. Like every new set changes, and you can't. It's hard. Like I like the same old. I do, but in a game, it's nice to have that change. Even if it takes, say, the stubborn hardline player and they don't want to play anymore because of the change. That's fine, because you're going to add 3 new players because of the change.
Exactly.
And that old player is going to come back anyway because they're going to want to, because they're like, well, why are you guys still playing this dumb game?
Yeah.
It just takes those people and just shuts them down.
Yep.
And sooner or later, they do come back. They want to play because, mana burn is not a thing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, literally, like, when I tell, like, a player that, I played Magic back in the day, and I'm, how's mana burn now? I really hated that. I said, mana burn's been gone since, like, forever. What? Yeah, that was, like, back in 94 when mana burn was still a thing. I don't even know when it was. But
I want to say 10th edition is when it got removed.
Right. And so, I don't know. I love that. I love the way that in the times where video games are running rampant and controlling how everything works, and politics are getting in the way of everything, Magic's still just Magic.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's ultimately where my criticism that we're going to throw in comes in of Magic is, remember how good it was. Like remember you were doing the right thing for a long time.
Right.
Please continue to do the right thing.
yeah, no, absolutely. That would be mine too.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah, my only criticism would be don't change what's not broke. Like, stop.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to, from a store owner standpoint, stop producing a set every week. You don't know, and nobody wants to buy something like that. I mean, there are people, but just keep going with what's working. You guys are doing a wonderful job. So
All right.
anyway, until next time.
Catch you guys in the next one.